village closing on Friday?
Yes, so we're going to be doing this in 2 stages. As you know, the select board is selling the development rights essentially for buildings at the Southfield Condominium Association. We're going to do the first 2 buildings on Friday. Those are the buildings that are on the same side as the other condos that have already been built out. Phil Mathewson would like to get the order in for the materials so we can get those started this spring. And so we'll do those 2 first, and then we'll do the rest of the sale at a later date once everything is squared away with the condominium association.
For everything on Friday though?
Yeah, we're just going to do the first 2 phases on Friday.
We're not getting all the money in once.
Not all at once, so we're going to break it up into 2. So we did that amended purchase and sales agreement that had the sale broken out into 2 stages. So we're going to execute the first stage, hopefully on Friday, assuming that all the title search and everything comes through fine, which it should. It's just, everyone's got to dot I's and cross T's.
All right.
All right, and so I just need authorization from the select board to represent the town and execute all documents related to that, the sale of those development rights.
So move.
I second.
All those in favor? Aye? Aye.
Great.
All right, thanks, Nicole.
Thank you.
Thank you for saving me from having to take it out from work.
Yeah, no problem.
And with that, I'll hand it over to Carl Mazzino. Thanks, Carl.
Thank you, Tyler. First, let me apologize. I didn't remember to turn off my phone, so I'll do that now, and I'm sure the rest of you have already done that. The members of the Budget Committee who are present tonight, we started on the left here with Ronnie McIntyre. Then we've got, starting down at the end there, Al Lenos, Jim Long next to me, and sitting in the other side of the room, we have Bob Lambert on the right, and Andy Sliver over here on my left. I just want to comment that if you, Tyler mentioned, if you would like to raise a question, raise your hand. We'd like to wait until Seth has finished at least a portion of his presentation. He'll let us know when he's ready to take questions. Unless you have something terribly dramatic, in which case go ahead and raise your hand and we'll see if we can stick it in there. Nicole, would you like to take the introduction from there?
No, actually, I'm just going to turn it right over to Seth, our Assistant Town Administrator and Public Works Director, to get us started.
Thanks. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Carl. And thanks to the Budget Committee. I guess I'll quickly start by saying, after a couple of years of not doing this in person, it's nice to be back here. I know we do that with a little bit of anxiety, but it's great to be in the same place. Doing this again, I enjoy this. It's a chance to highlight some of the things that we're doing, some of the people that work here, and some of the projects we have lined up for next year. So it's always a great honor to have a chance to do this. Tonight I'm going to introduce them twice. 2 superintendents that I work with daily, outstanding employees that work and help me run the operation. In fact, I help them run the operation is probably the reality of that. Nate Brown's our utility superintendent. He's also helps to oversee our recycling division. And that's a change we made when Rodney Bartlett retired and I stepped into my new role. Nate's helping me on the operational line with recycling, landfill management, some of those things as well. Great background for that. Started his career with Peterborough with the Peterborough Recycling Center and worked his way up to managing our entire utilities division. I also have Tim Rose here tonight, who is our highway superintendent. Another great story. Tim came to us, worked for Buildings and Grounds, mowing grass, and is now, and among all sorts of handyman jobs, but it now actually runs our highway department, our general services department, and is absolutely indispensable to this community. So I appreciate them both being here tonight. Bob Lambert's our liaison from the Budget Committee. He worked with us a little bit on the development of this budget, so thank you for your time on that, Bob. We appreciate it. So we're talking about the FY23 budget for Public Works, and there's a lot to get through. I know the request was try to get this be as concise as possible, move quickly, but we do have a lot to get through, so I'll go as quick as I can. As Carl said, I think just to try to keep things moving at a healthy pace. As we finish one division, I'll sort of take a step back, and if you have questions about anything you've seen, anything within the budget binder, or it's not even a binder this year, the full packet, I'll stop there. Seeing none, I'll just move on from there and try to keep moving at a relatively brisk pace. So, quick overview, I think it's important. We're going to talk about mission and main department objectives, because I think it's hard to have a conversation about public works unless you sort of understand what our top aim is as a department. I'm going to give a Public Works division and a staff overview for each one of the subdivisions within Public Works. We're going to talk about the FY23 operating budget overview, I'm not going to go line by line. We're going to talk about specific items that have great variation or may be of great interest or new projects for next year. We are prepared to answer questions about other items, but I tried to hone in on the things that I thought really highlighted the budget this year. And then lastly, I'll go through the CIP overview. A lot of that's not in this document, but will be, if approved. I think we're expecting it would be go to town meeting in some cases, so it's good to bring those up now. They all sort of, many of these tie in with the operating budget as well. So our mission is to enhance the safety and livability of the community by providing and managing services and infrastructure in support of reliable and safe transportation, clean water, and a clean, safe, and enjoyable environment. And that is what guides pretty much all of our decisions, whether we're dealing with someone from the public on a driveway issue or dealing with a major capital project. This is what we aim at. We're trying to make our community a better, more functional place. Our major objectives, if you really look at the top level, is as follows. We deliver 170 million gallons of clean water annually to thousands of residents and users of our system. Treat over 140 million gallons of dirty water annually at the wastewater treatment plant. Maintain over 70 miles of public roadway, but in reality, if you think about that, we maintain both sides of the road, so it's closer to really 140 miles because we do both shoulders, both sides of the road, both sets of curb, whatever the case may be. Process over 2,000 tons of waste per year with over 70% recycled. We maintain and repair all town buildings, maintain and enhance over 37 acres of public parks and trail. However, I will add to that, we do that thankfully with the support of the Parks Committee, who does a tremendous amount of volunteer work in our downtown and our West Peterborough Texera Park, so they deserve a lot of credit for the beautification of this town, and they do have a budget that we'll talk about. And then we support many, many special requests from service from the community on a daily basis, from all sorts of things that go in from Bill today that Nate responded to. You know, it's constant. We are always constantly dealing with customer service. No job too big or small. We always try to go out of our way to make this a little bit better community every day. Administrative components of the budget, as opposed to honing into those as we go, when we look at the personnel costs within an administration, these are the types of things that I spend my time on, or I share this time with the superintendents, or I share some of this with the town administrator, but this is really where those personnel costs are paying for. Just to try to keep things moving, just try to give you an overview of sort of what's the day in the life as we're planning or coordinating construction or project management or grant writing or doing any of the things that we do to try to support the business. All right, so there's a great variation in this year's budget for the heating fuel, gasoline, diesel, and electricity. So again, to keep things moving relatively quickly, I thought it might be a little more advantageous to just lay it out in one slide and show you the logic that was used to develop those forecasts. Everybody knows that all these heating fuels, gas and diesel, things are kind of out of whack at this point. We're looking at levels right now in gas and diesel that have been as high as they've been in 10 years. And that's tough on our business. We use a lot of fuel, we heat a lot of buildings, and it's hard to predict these costs in a market that's been this volatile since the pandemic first wave, and now we saw those incredibly low prices due to limited transportation, but then things skyrocketed. So the logic that's built into that budget was based on federal forecasting, as opposed to just taking last year's budget and applying some type of multiplier to it. We've traditionally always used federal forecasting, and it's tended to work pretty good, but the market hasn't always been as volatile as it is right now. The federal forecasts are listed on the screen. That's $2.66 a gallon for gas, $3.19 a gallon for diesel, $3 a gallon for heating oil, and $2.25 a gallon for propane. That was taken from the Federal Energy Commission. I forgot, I'm sorry off the top of my head the name, but there is an administrative bureau, sorry?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. We take those numbers and we actually just multiply it back out by our consumption. We track our consumption, we track our electricity, we track our gas, our diesel, our heating pellets, and our fuel oil, and our propane for all divisions. That's how those forecasts came up. So you've seen some wild swings. In some cases, some went up, some went down. And on the great outliers, there's at least 2 in that budget. We'll talk about those because there's a little bit of additional logic built in there. So last but not least, electricity. We work with an electricity broker, Standard Power. We're currently under contract, and we consult with them on our electricity needs. We reached out in advance of developing this draft budget for our electricity needs, and our broker basically told us we have no idea what next year is going to look like in electricity. My recommendation is to add 30% to your present budget, hopefully come in below that. Our commitment, as you all know, many of you have been involved with this for a long time, is always if we raise money and we don't need to spend it, we're not going to spend it. So we have sort of padded the budget with electricity because we just don't know what next year is going to look like. but our commitment is not to just go spend that on something else. If the rate ends up being reasonable, then there'll be leftover money in those budgets. We felt that was important though, because if you look at these gas prices, those are considerably lower than what we forecasted last year. Heading into, at this time last year, forecasts were much higher. They sort of got them right. Gas and diesel prices have been out of control. But again, next year they're down. Hedging our bets a little bit, we're saying, okay, we're going to drop down our gas and diesel and heating fuel pricing, but let's make sure that we've got something in the budget to help us in the event that those forecasts are wrong. But we didn't want to do both. We thought that wouldn't help us maintain a healthy bottom line for our operating budget, so we went with the more conservative forecasts on the gas and diesel. Actually, before I move on from that and dive into the divisions, any questions on heating or electricity? Seeing none? I put this in order, the presentation this year, based on the packet, and the first is the buildings and grounds. A quick overview. The buildings and grounds division, which has sort of been enveloped into our general services and highway model while still exists and is still in the budget, handles the following. They basically beautify the town, take care of miscellaneous projects, upkeep of townhouse, police station, libraries, cemeteries, and parks. Again, a lot of that parks work happens by volunteer help, but we do support that on some level. Other projects that involve general maintenance, painting, landscaping, mowing, etc. And we maintain 37 acres of town-owned property, parks and cemeteries. Tim Rose is again here with us tonight. He's our highway and general services superintendent. Working for him, he has 1 full-time custodian, and in a traditional budget year, 3 part-time seasonal laborers help to support this work alongside the Parks Committee. I put an asterisk there because we're about to get into that. And I'll get to that when we get down to parks. So, operating budget highlights for buildings and grounds. The budget as presented in front of you now is down 8.1%. I made an adjustment earlier today. We were re-looking at our heating fuel. That number was too low. That number was, I think, 11,500, and it was dramatically too low because I missed on something. We have traditionally had issues with our pellet boilers here. When they go down, this building takes an awful lot of oil to keep heated. Obviously, there are employees that work here, so we have to maintain it. So we've added some money back into the budget to make sure, once again, that we're not putting ourselves in a tough position. If the pellet boilers run all year and everything goes perfectly, and we never have any maintenance that's extended for a week or two, then the original forecast is fine, but it's wise to leave a little bit of extra money in there in the event that we have an issue. So that's why there was a change on that line in the new packet. We've increased the heating fuel line to $18,900. Now these numbers off to the right reflect the change, what happened to the budget. Essentially, anywhere I've made an adjustment to try and illustrate year over year, or an error I've recalculated just to kind of give you an idea. I guess I did that not knowing for certain whether or not we'd be sending out an update prior to the meeting. So that ends up being 4.77%, or down $10,593. Major highlights are a reduction to our services line and a reduction to the heating fuel line. Otherwise, a relatively level budget. Cemetery is down 20.9%, or $9,785. I've only listed this salary reallocation because I believe in week 1, the town administrator, finance director went over some new formatting for salary, so I'm not going to beat that one to death. I think they already gave you the logic. But it does drive smaller budgets considerably, that's why it's down. And then there was the transfer to the general fund, which I believe you also covered in week 1. There were some transfers and things that were no longer going to happen. So on a very tiny budget, it ends up looking like a huge percentage change, but it's logical stuff that was covered in week 1. Parks is up considerably, 54.98%, or $27,804. A couple things to note here. Last year, coming into our first season after the depth of the original pandemic, we had an awfully hard time finding any seasonal labor. We couldn't find enough employees that were willing to work. And as far as we know right now, we don't know what this next season's going to look like. So to maintain the downtown, we made a decision to contract out the mowing for the downtown area, our parks. And so all we've essentially done is the salary reallocation to services is we move the money we would normally raise for seasonal employees, for a couple of seasonal employees, down into the services line to help us cover. So our hope is still to go back out and try to hire younger folks who have an interest in working for us, or anyone for that matter who's willing to work for us and do a part-time job. But reality was this last year it was very difficult to find help, and we still need to get the work done. So that's what this number is here. We've essentially moved that from the salary line down to services. Next component of the services line is our typical $3,500. That handles any incidental costs that Tim might need to chase down. You can think of 1,000 different examples of something that might be damaged or something that needs repair. So we do keep a service line in the parks to help us be able to fund any problems that might come up. The next one's the big one. About a year ago, the Parks Committee, folks have already mentioned, reached out and wanted to take a hard look at all of our trees in the downtown, specifically the parks, West Peterborough as well. Citing that they were concerned that there were some disease issues with some of the trees, that there was needed pruning. Obviously, we have an obligation to the community to provide upkeep for the ornamental trees in the downtown and throughout the town. But they had worked with me to work with an arborist, Tim was involved here as well too, to develop a quote to look at all the trees in the downtown on a treatment program for some of them that were showing some signs of some distress. And I'll get into some of the things that they identified in a moment. So that's $28,840. The next slide will cover this in a little bit more detail. There are 3 offsets built in to help with that program. The first is $7,500 from the Charitable Foundation. The town receives a charitable donation from the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation each year called the Fred and Betty Fry Fund. It is, if you recall from a couple town meetings ago, set up the select board or the agents to expend, so it's appropriate to take it through a budgetary process. And in consultation with the Parks Committee, they had recommended the use of $7,500 to help with this program. So that's revenue offset 1. Second is the downtown TIF to cover the remaining downtown portion of this work, which I'll show you in a moment, is $95.60. And the last being $22.80, which covers the component of the quote for Texera Park in West Peterborough. So after revenues and direct billing of this $7,500, and in fact I should back up 1 second. There was a change to the services line. We reduced it by $7,500 from your last iteration, and the reason is because we can direct bill for that work from that charitable expendable trust, so it's appropriate to back that down off of the line item. So that was the change. After revenues, the tree program will cost taxpayers an additional $9,300 for year 1. So when we adjust all that year over year with revenues, the parks budget's actually down when you factor in the revenues, down 5.41 or thereabouts. So it's a relatively cumbersome project. I'm happy to provide more details. They may be needed for another meeting, but to get this conversation started with the budget, because there's a lot to unpack here, these are all the areas that we looked at with the arborist company. Depot, Putnam, Bocelli, Grove Street, Riverwalk parking lot, Texera Park, and the War Memorial and Townhouse area out here. We looked at, quoted 80 trees in total, pruning, obvious, dead for ornamental trees, for dead limbs, for other hazard, trunk flare excavations, which deals with removal of soil from around the base of the tree in order to allow the tree not to have any rot on the trunk. So there's a hump. I didn't provide a great level of detail on what trees getting what treatment, because I felt like that might be a little bit more than we wanted to do tonight. But these are the different types of things that were identified that need to happen to the trees according to the professional arborists. Soil growth, applied growth regulators is just for trees that you don't want to grow as fast. There's a treatment technique they can do for our downtown trees or our parking lots to sort of stunt the growth of those a little bit without harming them. That's obviously advantageous because if they grow out in certain areas, it can cause problems to other infrastructure too. Targeted insect and disease, there was sign of the emerald ash borer in some of our ash trees downtown, and hemlock woolly adelgid, and also some scale disease on some of the trees on the bark. So those were all identified and built into this treatment program as well. So I gave you the 1-year cost. I will mention now, if this were to be approved and we want to move forward on this type of program, there are additional costs into the future after some inspections with an arborist service to see if they're needed. Recommended for a couple of years out for some more, another round of scale and disease control for those trees that need that. Treatment at $4,040, so in FY24, if we determined we needed to do that, there would be another $4,000 for the next round of treatments on these trees. FY25 ash treatment, so he's suggesting 3 years out, you would have to treat the ash trees again for the emerald ash borer to keep those under control. And then the growth inhibitors are every few years to keep the trees from growing out. So that's a really, really high-level, quick look at a relatively complicated program for 80 trees. I guess that's a good spot, so sure.
Quick question.
Yeah.
The services for the arborist, are they a line item here or not? And excuse me for not seeing it, or?
Under the Parks Services line, yes, those are built into that number.
Okay.
I can back up.
Page 30, Al.
Thank you.
And should reflect $35,840, and then the breakdown is,
Services, yes.
so it's $28,840 of that $35,000 line is for this proposed tree program.
Yes. Is the mowing for the cemeteries also included in the mowing that's in the park? Or where is that showing up there?
The mowing is, we didn't hire out for the mowing for cemeteries, it was only for the downtown.
Oh.
Yep. We were able to cover that, we had enough seasonal help and help through our highway division to get that work done.
There was a process there that made it easier to hire out downtown than cemeteries.
Right. Okay, any other questions on this, or keep cruising along? Yes, ma'am.
I noticed that, do we typically use TIF money to do like tree pruning and regular maintenance like that? And is that what
Yeah.
you're planning on, like future costs if need be to continue?
I would certainly want to explore that, yes, and we do use TIF monies to support the maintenance within the TIF districts.
Of the TIF improvements.
Yes, of the
Which in
TIF
West
improvements.
Peterborough, the parks certainly are.
Right, thank you. Yes, Howard?
Find that hiring a contractor to do that mowing was more cost effective than offering a higher pay rate to potential seasonal employee?
Yeah.
What is the rate for a mower, like a summer mower?
What's our starting wage now, Tim, do you recall?
I know they went up. I want to say, I think we're at 13 or 14, something like that. Most of the people we're aiming for is either fresh out of high school or somewhere in college that have that free summertime. So there's not really a whole lot of experience there, which there's not really a whole lot needed. So the wages are generally right in the middle teens there somewhere.
Right.
So could we raise that rate and avoid paying a contractor? And I'm sure that's more expensive, maybe, even.
Actually,
Contract, yeah.
I think it was actually a little cheaper
Yeah.
this past year because the contractor is already in the downtown area, so they were able to, utilize the fact their workforce is already mobilized here.
Right.
Plus, if you have a contractor, you've got some power there where you got a person coming in for the summer. If he wants to go to the beach one day, they're gone and calling in sick and stuff. So the contract, you got a little binding.
Yeah, there are advantages and disadvantages to both models for sure. I mean, there's an advantage to having them on your own staff in
Right.
case you need to pivot and you have other work that's more pressing in that moment. Because when we're under contract with this, that's what we pay them to do. To answer your question, we tried. We had other hiring issues throughout the course of the year coming out of the deepest part of the pandemic. And we had really difficult times attracting people even as we pushed wages up and advertised higher wages. So our intent still is to try and hire out. We've allocated that money down into the services line. It could be in the salary line either, but for auditing purposes, it felt like it made more sense to start with it in services line as opposed to justifying the use of salary for a contracted service.
Well, certainly contractors using his own equipment that you don't have to maintain.
Right.
Yeah. All right.
Yes.
So the $43,340 that we're talking about in the services line under parks operation, are those salaries bumped down to that line? Is that what you were saying?
Yes.
Yes.
11,000 of that was moved from salary into the services line.
Well, then what accounts for the great leap? It was just, there's about 10,000 back in 2021 of actual expenditures. You said how much was moved down?
In the present draft budget, we moved basically the cost of the mowing from the salary line down into, what are we?
So it's the mowing, it's the tree work, it's the increase to contracted services, which took the money out of salaries, and then there's other miscellaneous, just in case that we need a contractor for something else, there's other
Right.
miscellaneous funds in there.
Thank you.
Sure. More questions on the parks proposal?
Are you looking for approval to go ahead with this disease or tree work?
Yes.
Or denial?
Yes.
Do we need to make a motion? Do we need to get a sense of the room, or what are we looking for?
I think we're hoping that it stays within the budget and is approved through the budgetary process. I will add to that obviously we've got to go to both TIF advisory groups that are mentioned here and get approvals there as well. Those meetings are scheduled for January, and these topics will be brought up at that time too. So I suppose from there too, I would take a recommendation from, once the committee's had a chance to think about this program, if you had a recommendation on what should we fail in our request for TIF funding, whether we should load the remaining costs into the operating budget without the offset. Yes, sir.
What is the downside of not doing this? I mean, what will these trees and everything look like a year from now?
Sure. I mean, according to the arborist, some of the trees have treatable diseases now that if we start to treat for, we can save those trees. The long term is we lose the tree, we replant, and the cost of mature trees, my understanding is to replant something appropriate for these settings would be more expensive than trying to get the disease under control now.
If you go to West Peterborough, you see some of the trees that are newly planted along that sidewalk. Some of them got green here and the top of them got nothing during the summer.
I think he took a couple of those down recently.
Yeah.
Probably, I don't know.
And there is
Put the
a-
cloud.
It's hard to emphasize the value of a mature tree, being able to save a mature tree. I mean, we saw what happened when we had to cut down the Christmas tree. A lot of people got very, very upset about
Yeah.
that.
Christmas was almost canceled there.
It was, yes, before
Yeah.
Christmas.
In part canceled. In
I
part
would add that, dating back to when these parks were established prior to me even getting to town here, Dr. Gordon, the Parks Committee, these weren't, the trees we're talking about in these parks were not sort of just placed wherever there was a vision for this. It was important, and the upkeep of these is important. It adds to the vibrancy of our downtown. It was the Parks Committee that brought this proposal forward, and I agree with it. We do have a professional obligation to maintain infrastructure, and the trees are part of that.
And some of them are also original to the property themselves.
Certainly, we had to, not only are we concerned about how the trees we're targeting are going to suffer, but these are highly communicable problems.
Right.
The emerald ash borer and the woolly adelgid are both dangerous things to have in town.
Right.
Well, I'll go on the record and say I'm in favor of the program getting started.
Thank you. I do think it's a good program, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, it's on record.
All right, I'm good to move on then. We'll move into the highway division, which now includes street lighting as well. In years past, it did not, but we subtotal it under highway at this point, I think appropriately so. So the highway division is responsible for the ongoing maintenance and improvement of our roadway network and related infrastructure. Includes paving, repairing, plowing town roads and parking lots, winter operations, of which there's been a lot lately, maintaining stormwater and drainage systems, roadside mowing, brushing and tree work, maintaining and improving sidewalks, and so on. They also handle the fleet services for our community and multiple departments as well through the following staff. So there's 9 full-time employees that work for the highway. Tim Rhodes is the superintendent. He's got a heavy equipment operator, a fleet mechanic, fleet technician and laborer, and 5 truck driver laborers that work. So when you look at those personnel costs, these are the people that budget supports. The highway budget as presented in the draft that I was working on before the one went out today was 27.61% or $452,000 year over year. But as you probably noticed, there were numerous TIF projects in there that were showing against the bottom line. So as you adjust for the TIF projects, which are the West Peterborough Drainage and Sidewalk Project, which was deferred from 21, which I will give a lot more detail about shortly when we get into the CIP portion. And South Peterborough Engineering Services, which is $100,000, which I will also get into when we get into the CIP. When you adjust those out and look at just operating year over year, we're actually about flat. It's essentially the same budget. There is some variation. We've added some monies to supplies, and in fact, rather than me chat through them, Tim, if you want to talk about your experiences with purchasing supplies and services as of late.
That's been a nightmare, I think, not just for us, I think across the board and with contractors everywhere. Supplies are hard to come by, and if you do find them, they're either weeks or months out. So it just creates a challenge for us because prices have increased substantially, 30 to 40% across the board. So we have to plan for that going forward. Pipe right now, HDPE pipe is months out if you can find it. And I think we're upwards of $25 to $30 a foot, I believe, is what EJ's coming in at. So nothing's as it was last year.
So the budget reflects that. We've added some money to supplies, to vehicle repair, which is the parts and pieces we need to maintain the fleet. Salt is up considerably, but we're not certain. The market forecast on salt is that it should, as transportation levels back off. It wasn't actually the price of salt itself that was driving the increase, the 35% increase year over year. It was actually the transportation. It was, again, the logistical issues that so many of the things that we buy, even for our personal lives, were being impacted by. And rather than just jump the budget by 30% for salt, since we previously established the Winter Ops Expendable Trust, we've added $5,000 to this line. We'll hope that the market regulates, and if we have to, we're prepared to come to the board, who are the agents to expend the Winter Ops Expendable Trust, and ask for some relief next winter. Tim made a savvy move this last year and helped us with this winter and pre-bought a lot of salt prior to the price increase. So we were able to keep our budget under control so far. It was a savvy move. Get out in front of it, fill the silo, and then the price increase happened. So we were able to keep our operating budget right now sort of in check based on some pre-buying. The diesel operational change, this is one of the two kind of major outliers in the gas diesel heating conversation. You'll notice the diesel line is way up in the highway budget, and there's a logical explanation for that. We're using more diesel. And the reason we're using more diesel is because, Tim, again, another operational change, we have removed 3 contractors from our snow hauling operation. So when they do overnight snow pickup, there are 3 less tri-axle trucks that are not part of our fleet on the road. He retooled the way we were doing snow pickup, and we were able to save some money on the service end of things. Obviously, it means that we spend more money on fuel because we have trucks running back and forth unloading, and when you have a relatively heavy winter, that ends up being a lot of fuel, but it ends up being a good and substantial cost savings for the community on our snow hauling operation. So that's the justification for why the diesel line is up high, where you've seen a lot of other areas of the budget where the diesel or the gas is a little bit lower. We actually are using that much more. But when you compare it when you compare $500 worth of diesel versus $2,500 worth of contracted services, it still becomes a winning proposition. And then lastly, affecting these numbers, if $21,600 for street lighting supplies has come out. The reason is last year we raised money for the Route 101 water main project to go with the new bridge. And part of that was a street lighting and the pathway that goes under the bridge. We couldn't take that money out of enterprise funds, so we raised that portion through the street lighting budget. We've paid the state for that work, so we reduced the budget back down. Before we move on, any questions that you have about highway at this point? Yes.
One question. Going back to highway administration, forgive me, but you've listed $1,650 for telephone. Is that going to be enough?
Yeah, I believe, Ronnie, I'll double check this and get back to you, but I believe that administrative line pays for a small portion of the administrative phone here. We have an 8x8 service, so we allocate the costs out for, say, my desk phone, for the licensing for my desk phone.
Oh, the reason I asked the question is the prior year you were at $4,500 rounded figure for telephone.
We're looking under highway and administration,
Yes.
$1,650 down from $4,557. So I'll have to double check that number for you.
Okay.
I'm fairly certain that I know that it was upgrades made to the system that were purchased at that time, but I want to double check that before you get back to me if you don't mind. Yes, Bill?
I'm looking at the highway special articles, and that's where your TIF expenses are for highway. So those are those TIF projects that you mentioned up here.
Yes.
One each of South Peterborough, one for downtown Peterborough, and one for West Peterborough. You said the South Peterborough one is for engineering?
Yes. I'll go into that in far more detail when I do the second half of the presentation for the CIP. We'll talk about that. If that's okay. I can jump ahead. if you
No,
like.
that's fine. I sit on the downtown Peterborough,
Sure.
so.
Downtown's been removed, so.
It's South Peterborough
He's using
and
an
West
old
Peterborough.
one.
Look at the new,
Oh, the new one?
the new one, got downtown isn't in there.
It isn't in there?
No, just west and south, Peterborough. 350 and 100,000.
I'll take it there. Yeah, any other questions for myself or Tim on the highway budget? It's going to be an interesting year. Fuel, electricity, salt, we're going to do our best. But, you know, thankfully this community had the presence of mind to set up the winter ops extendable trust, because I think if there were a year it's looking like we might have to use it, next year could be interesting with salt. That takes us to recycling and solid waste, which includes landfill monitoring / post-closure. Recycling maintains and promotes a healthy environment by safely and efficiently receiving and processing over 2,000 tons of waste on average annually, of which over 70% is recycled. We also have moved the management of the groundwater monitoring program for our closed landfills sort of within sanitation, and Nate's been helping me with that program, which has been an ongoing program. The recycling and solid waste and landfill monitoring area of the budget includes 4 full-time employees and 1 part-time employee. They are Scott Bradford, manager. Unfortunately, Scott couldn't be with us tonight. Nate Brown, who's the utilities superintendent, who, like I said earlier in the evening, has taken on more of an operational charge for this aspect of the business as well, and can help me in Scott's absence to navigate through the budget if you have any specific questions. There are 2 recycling attendants who do a great job at work at our center, and 1 part-time sort of call-in weekend individual that helps us as well. Total sanitation is up 5.41%, or 25,456 as presented. There was a couple things to note here, so we can take a little bit closer look at just operations year over year. Adjusting for pay-as-you-throw, because it's a self-supporting program, it was subtotaled and is subtotaled within the program, but to separate that out helps us to look a little closer at operating. So I've separated that. If you separate that out, separate out the post-closure, because again, there's been a bit of a formatting change to that program. And there was a supplies line error of $4,000 that was showing twice. It was under the administrative portion, and then I think another $36.50 was under the operations portion. That was redundant, shouldn't be in there twice. The actual numbers are $300 under administration, or $350, and I think $36.50. So it ends up taking a few more dollars out of the budget. When you factor those in, we're at 4.22, or $13,000. And this is primarily being driven by, again, personnel, salary reallocations that were discussed in week 1 of the process. And then we've added some money for diesel, which I'll get to in a second. But there's a $28,000 equipment line purchase in there, and that's for a glass crushing bucket. I presented this through the CIP process, and I will get into that in a little bit more detail when I do the CIP portion, if you don't mind, because I've got a couple pictures of it and give you an idea of what we're actually talking about. There's also an increase in diesel to run that machine. It's actually a front-end bucket that will attach to our present machine, but we expect we'll be using more fuel to run this thing. So an increase in diesel to account for that. And then $3,000 in the supplies line to put new foam-filled tires on our front-end loader. Any questions about recycling operations without pay-as-you-throw or post-closure in there?
Now, you mentioned the staffing level, you feel you're fully staffed at this point?
Yes, I do.
So is the mini mall going to be open on a longer basis in the week?
We'll look at the operation again. Part of that's just been the difficulty with managing that coming out of the pandemic. We've still had some operational challenges in terms of staffing. We wanted to phase that back in a little bit slower, but I do anticipate as this next sort of rise in cases and anxiety starts to subside a little bit, that we'll be closer to a normal operation on the mini mall this coming spring and summer. There's a lot of upkeep that is involved with that. It's, as you can imagine, not popular with our employees who have to manage it while they're trying to manage their other duties, but we do see it as a benefit to the community, and we'll work towards getting that reopened.
Yeah, I like it, but when I was there, I was told that it was a staffing shortage was the reason that it wasn't open more. It is just a short answer by the people.
Yeah, we did struggle, as I mentioned earlier, to get restaffed at the facility. We do have 2 relatively new full-time employees, so there was, between pandemic and loss of staff, there was some challenges there. But it has been opened on a part-time basis, and I think we'll move closer towards getting it open more often. Yes, Tyler?
There's a recycling center advisory committee. Is there any way to do a volunteer to sit in mini mall, or that's some kind of program there? I know that group hasn't met in quite some time.
Yeah, I think it's been quite some time. Volunteer situations can be a little tricky as an employer and as an insured employer. I mean, it's certainly something we could explore, the possibility, but can be problematic depending on the environment in which they're working in.
I do think, Tyler, it's a good idea to follow up on that. I've seen that done another time.
Maybe.
Yeah, no, I will definitely look into it.
If the committee's not meeting, maybe we need some more volunteers.
Yes, sir.
Your building of the sheds for storage, is that a CIP or?
FY24, we were aiming for FY24
Okay,
to replace the trailers.
Okay, so there's not.
Not in the present budget. Okay. We felt the more critical item was the glass issue we have kind of culminating or congregating in the back of the facility, and it's time to start dealing with that.
Would you be able to use that crushed material in the highways? There enough?
Yeah.
I'm sure you don't make it
There's a lot of uses for it as a fill material. It has the obviously crushing it down will save us a lot of space, but it becomes an aggregate product that can be used for fill. It can be used in road bases, and in fact, we have some projects on our couple-year look ahead that we could use here with the town as well to dispose of a lot of that glass. We hope that it will have some value to contractors too as a fill, but I'll show you a picture of it. We'll go through all that.
Okay.
Any other questions before I can breeze through pay-as-you-throw. It's a self-supporting program. The cost of the bags, the purchase of the bags supports the program itself. We expect the bags are going to go up in price. We don't have that forecast quite yet. Scott did the best he could through the people that we purchased the bags to come up with the price. You see it reflected on the screen. We're expecting it to go up around $6,200. So the bag price will go up, but again, the bags support the program. Post-closure and ground monitoring is down 45.13. This has to do with the way we're reporting that, which was covered last week. But to break that down to understand what that really means from an operating perspective, our actual contracted price is expected to increase to $62,000. The town's obligation is 50% of that money. That has been offset through a fund for a long time now. What is
Federal
it?
trust fund since, I think, the early 2000s.
Yeah.
It's been quite a while.
Okay.
But the balance of that is running down, so I know I'm not expecting anyone to remember this, but in a couple of years, we're going to be talking about needing to fully tax support that.
Right. Okay. And this is ground monitoring for the closed landfills, and we're under a requirement to do this work. We contract this service out to an engineering firm who helps us by doing all the ground monitoring, sampling, and reporting. We work with them. Nate's worked very closely with them over the last year. And prior to my job changing a bit, it was something that I worked a fair amount on throughout different stages of the year. So what it means, though, and again, this is offset by an expendable trust fund and New Hampshire ball bearing proceeds cover that cost. The total increase or the outlay to the town, if we weren't supporting with an expendable trust, would be an additional $27.50 to us. So there has been a contractual price increase on that, or expected. Questions about anything in recycling, pay-as-you-throw, or post-closure? Yes, Bill?
A real quick one. The pay-as-you-throw, we're expecting a price increase on the bags. Are we passing that along to the cost of the bags? What are we currently
Well, we haven't increased the price of the bags since the program started.
Right.
I think we would need to take a look and see if it's warranted. There is, of course, a lifespan on the equipment that we use. There's a compactor, the shed, and of course the bags themselves. So we could take a look at what we're charging, which I think is $15 for the large rolls, and I forget how much the small rolls cost because I never buy those. You know, so that has never increased over the life of the program, but it may be time coming up to take a look at that.
I'm a real revenues guy. I'd like to see that happen because it's been how many years?
Right.
been a
But
long
keep
time.
in mind that it goes into a revolving fund, so it's not actually used to offset tax
Offset.
dollars. We just pay for the program.
How has enrollment been in the program? Are we getting new customers, if you will, or is it due to the population, or is it steady? Are we losing customers?
I think it's been pretty static, actually. That's a great question for Scott, and one I'll jot down and see. But I believe we can sort of track that based on our stickers, and I think those have been relatively static year over year. Disposal went up quite a bit during the pandemic when recycling sort of wound down for a while, so that people, as we were sort of feeling our way through what was safe to do and what wasn't, so we saw that, but that's sort of leveled off.
I see cars without stickers, and I don't say anything, I mean, of course, I'm not going to say anything, but is there a way that people have stickers but don't display them? That's what he finds
I think
sometimes?
there's a lot of people who do not like putting them on the glass, and our staff check on that, but I believe they do the best they can to try to keep up with that. It's a little bit of a tough one. If you've been on a Saturday afternoon, you notice we've got 2 staff members outside, usually running a machine and maybe 70 cars all piling in at the same time. So I think they do their best to try to stay after it and remind people, but it can be a little bit of a trick too. Yes, Bill?
One more question. Under aluminum cans revenues, quite a dramatic increase in revenues. How do we account for that?
It's as simple as the price of that commodity has gone up tremendously since the start of the pandemic. We're getting more money through commingling than we were getting by separating in the past. So this is one of those moments when it's nice to have the guy who talks to the brokers with us tonight, but unfortunately, like I said, he couldn't be there. But I do believe it's that simple. I believe that's close to the explanation that Scott would give you if he were here. The price of the commodity has increased. It's more valuable if we're getting more money for it. I don't think it's indicative of more of it's coming in. It's that it's actually worth that much more.
You'd be sending people into other towns to clean up their roadsides?
I'm not sure it's that valuable.
They do it on off weekends when they're not volunteering at the dump store.
All right. I'm sorry, any other questions on recycling, pay-as-you-throw, post-closure? If any come to mind after the fact? I did talk to Scott on the phone today. I said we'd be happy to come back and have another meeting when he can be here. That will take us to our utility division, which consists of the water and wastewater department and is responsible for overseeing water and wastewater facilities, as well as all aspects of water and wastewater system, distribution and collection systems, monitoring our wells and sewer system. I didn't point it out earlier, but I meant to. What you see here is a picture of what our GIS system looks like, and this is the system that we use, our Geographic Information System, to understand where all of our especially buried infrastructure exists. We have all that mapped in the community, and I had a picture of our GIS system for that tree program up. We actually have cataloged all the trees because it's looking like it might be a multi-year program. That way, if there's ever a change in personnel or anything like that, someone can pick the program up and move forward. But that's another, I just wanted to point that out. What you see, I believe, on these, maybe you could explain.
Yellow are the manholes, the
Yeah,
orange
manholes,
is the,
but what's the red?
the red would be, water main breaks. Yeah.
Water main.
I don't want to say that. So anyway, we do track all that, and we have all this in our system. There's a lot of information there, but I meant to point that out on the tree program too, that it was important to me that if we were going to move forward in that, we had that cataloged in a meaningful way so that someone could pick the program up and run with it if necessary. We have 6 full-time employees that work for water and sewer. They're the same crew. They work on both sides. We have 2 that are dedicated mostly wastewater treatment operators, but they're jack of all trade guys too. They do anything, but they're dedicated to the lab and the plant. Nate Brown is the superintendent, oversees the staff and the operations. And then there's 3 additional staff, which are primarily water operators that are out in the field maintaining the system, of which one of those gentlemen is our backflow coordinator. and the other is a pretreatment coordinator. If you were, anyone who's been doing this a long time might remember we dissolved. We used to have like $55,000 we used to pay out for our backflow program, but we brought that in-house and saved a bunch of money a few years ago, and I'm still kind of proud of that one. We built out a system where we can manage that, and they've done a great job keeping that moving. And those are the types of, I think, savings that sometimes get lost over years and years of operating budgets, but we keep that in-house, and it's been a success. The water division is down 34.75%, or $515,000. Looking at the budget, you can see it's primarily driven by two major items. The reduction of debt principal and interest, thanks to the work of our finance department, really. And then, of course, we raised money for Cold Springs Engineering in FY22, so when you subtract those out, we're still down tremendously, but it starts to paint a little bit clearer picture of what the year's looking like year over year. There are two, it's a relatively level funded budget, but there are two considerable items. The first, you'll see the water administration salary, and that is former town administrator Rodney Bartlett, who still works for us as a capital projects manager on a part-time basis. He and I have both been focused primarily on the Main Street Bridge and the Coldstone Springs project over the last year. But as we wind down the Main Street Bridge project, and we get into the real reality of starting the construction and all the planning beyond the we're doing engineering now, but as we get into the next phase of the project, his expertise and knowledge as a engineer will be very helpful to us. We're delighted to have him on the staff still. So anyway, this was a more appropriate place to put that money for our next year's focus would be within the water division. Also takes a lot of electricity to power all the pumps and things that keep water delivered to people's houses. So this one was worth calling out. It's a tremendous increase when you add 30% of the bottom line of electricity for water. So I wanted to point that out to you. Otherwise, as I said, year over year, it's a relatively flat budget in most cases. Any questions on the water division? The sewer department is 2.77%, or $41,000. Again, a big savings, a debt principal and interest savings of $47,000. A couple things to note here in the most recent iteration. In the iteration you may have been studying prior to tonight's meeting before you got this one, there was a rate analysis for $20,000 that has been removed. There was an error where there was a $30,000 line that was booked twice. It was my mistake. It was a miscommunication on my part. We've adjusted those. Prior to seeing that draft budget, I did an adjustment, and that just to see sort of where the bottom line would fall after these adjustments, and it came out to about 1.45% down, or $21,000. And the major driver or major outlier in this sewer budget this year is the chemical increase of $40,100 for our lead reduction initiative. And I think since I've talked too much, I'm going to hand that to Nate, and he can take you through what that's all about.
So our permit changed in 2016, and our lead limit went down essentially to zero, but we have lead coming in because there's lead solder and there's lead joints in the water mains. So we hired an engineering firm, and they suggested, we did a couple things, and one of the things we did, we tried out perchloride, and that worked. So it brought the lead down to essentially zero, but it's expensive. So I don't know what else to add.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Well, less
essentially.
expensive than what it would have been otherwise.
Right,
Yeah.
we would have had to spend millions of dollars to put in tertiary treatment at the treatment plant. So it saves us a ton of money. We can still take in septage, that is a revenue. But again, it's expensive. We're working on buying it in bulk. In order to do that, we need to either change our tanks out or change all the bolts, all the hardware on the tanks, because Ferric eat stainless, so they need to be titanium. That will make it a little bit cheaper, but chemical prices go up every year, so it might still cost the same next year as it does this year.
He's the boss, so you're gonna go with him.
I think you raised first.
Did I?
I think so.
All right. You were explaining to me the nature of the lead stuff, which probably help people understand it, because it's a pretty crazy program. The water that has to come out of the sewer treatment plant has to be zero lead, which is less than where the water goes, which is like in the river once it's already done. the water in the river is higher than we're allowed to put into it, so that's interesting. But when you
And lower
consider,
drinking water level.
Yeah.
right, it's lower than drinking water levels. And, well, fish have even lower levels than we do, apparently. So, in addition to that, on private well systems where, you know, water levels and lead could be much higher, and a lot of cases probably not even tested, but those are going into septic tanks, and we are accepting and making money off of taking people's septage, is what the word that you use for it. Other people call it other things. But when there's, you know, when you see the trucks drive around Allen Matheson and JCL septic pumping companies, we accept their waste. So the waste that comes in from them is generally pretty high lead levels. I would
Much higher,
assume.
yes. Yeah, because it's concentrated.
Yeah, and it's not public drinking water supply that's going into it.
Correct.
Yep. Could I add something to that? We're a regional.
No, that was it. That was-
Part of the financing that probably predates most of us required that we were a regional receiving facility. So we have an obligation based on our loans to the federal government for that plant to receive septage. So it's not like lead problem solved, stop receiving septage. We are a regional receiver, and that was a stipulation of our actual contract for the money. So it's a bit of a tough nut to crack, but it does end up being financially advantageous to the town because we do take in a lot of septage, and our labor to take that septage is next to almost nothing.
And there's also the DES grant that I think was in part contingent on us taking regional septic,
Right.
which is over $200,000 a year towards the wastewater treatment plant's bond. So not insignificant.
Is that overcome by the cost of the ferrous chloride?
The cost of the ferrous, the chemicals is up $40,000, so yes,
No.
it's substantially more.
Then
So you're
closer to
still,
100,000 receiving.
yeah. Well worth it.
And whether or not we took the septage in and got that revenue, we would still need a chemical to bring the lead down.
Right.
This is lead that's coming from pipes in old homes. It's coming from the pipes, you know, that the septic is traveling through to get to the treatment plant. So, you know, being in a community that's had this infrastructure built out for, about 100 years, it's, you know, well, I mean, the house is over 100 years. So, you know, it does accumulate, and it's very difficult to identify a source that you can get on and
Just talk.
So you mentioned water mains and pipes. Is there any lead joints in the water feed that people have?
There are.
So how's that water, so if the water's treated at the plant and then goes through pipes, is it picking up lead along the way?
It should not. There should be a coating built up on those joints,
Gotcha.
so that we won't drink the lead. We also, at the wells, we bring the pH up to a 7.5, so that the water itself doesn't attack the lead and take it out of the, and put it into the water.
And we do regularly test drinking water from the taps.
Great. So, I'll just add a couple more, just so you guys know, this isn't something, this was not just a little color commentary what you're saying. This was engineered. We worked with Underwood engineers on this program going back 5 years now, when we first knew our lead limit was going to go down. So this wasn't sort of a willy-nilly response to a lead, let's try some stuff. We worked year over year over year with an engineering firm to help us come up with a better chemical process for our plant. This is based on their recommendation that we're using this. It has worked. We've met our permit limit. Just in time for a new permit to be coming down the pipeline, and we'll see what happens next. But that's where we are. That's the game we play with the wastewater plant, our water distribution system. Any other questions on the sewer department?
The facility itself, does it need upgrading in some way? Or does that, again, is that covered by a separate CIP?
We keep numerous, no, the facility itself doesn't need any upgrades to use the chemical. The chemical is just added.
And in general use in wear and tear on the system itself, not because of the chemicals, just in general.
No, those two guys that are essentially working at the wastewater plant, they do maintenance. They do lab work, but they do preventive maintenance pretty much all day, every day.
Okay.
And/or clean.
But there are numerous lines in the operating budget that help us with the costs. Things always break, things always need replacing, pumps, motors, things corrode, and we do, that's where your services lines, supplies lines, and things for the sewer department support those activities. Okay, I believe that would take me to that CIP portion, and I'll go over, I think I already had it open.
If anyone does ever want to come down, feel free. We give tours to anybody.
It's fascinating. Completely fascinating operation.
So the capital improvement program presented quite a few things this year. There's been a couple additions that have happened sort of after. They're built in some cases to this budget. Some of them will go through the warrant process. But I think it's smart to talk about them. Why isn't that working? It doesn't seem to be working, so if you want to just advance me.
Just say click.
There it goes. Okay. Year over year, we put $35,000 in the highway budget for downtown stormwater separation. That gives us the available money we would need if we encounter any issues where we've got stormwater and wastewater in the same pipes. That's a big no-no. We don't want sewage ending up in the river, and we also conversely don't want rainwater as much as possible ending up in the sewer plant because we still have to pay to treat that water. So we keep a rider in here in our budget. So if we run into that problem, we have the money we need, because sometimes you have to contract out for that work. All right, so that's been an ongoing problem, not a problem. There are some issues most likely in the system. It's been an ongoing program. I think this has been in the budget for about a decade, maybe plus at this point. It's come in handy at certain times, and other times we raise it and we don't spend it. Sidewalk program, it's been $20,000 a year over year for the downtown corridor portion. It used to be offset with a TIF, but our intent is to move outside of the downtown now. The capital committee was very interested in hearing about High Street getting done. And I know Elm Street also has gotten some complaints too. We have other areas that need attention as well, but we've got $20,000 built in to do some additional sidewalk work this year. This is unfortunately this doesn't translate as well on this screen as it does on the computer laptop screen, but I wanted to give you a quick reminder on this project. A couple years ago, this project went all the way through the budgetary process and got approval. We even put it out to bid, engineered it, put it out to bid, and then early pandemic, the prices came in $80,000 over the original estimate, and so the recommendation was made to the board at that time to scrap this project. Let's not cut any corners on it. We could have shaved some items out of the project and done it for our total appropriation, but we felt all the items of this were critical to do and do it one time. Right now, construction costs have not come down, so I put this back in the budget this year. It's fully offset if approval happens again in late January from the TIF, West Peterborough TIF Advisory. I believe it will. This was a project they brought forward to the town and asked us to research, engineer, and put out to bid. My guess is they will be interested in this, but we'll be talking about that in late January. As a quick sort of overview of what this is, because I know this is really hard to read, this is actually Old Dublin Road right here, and this is actually Robb Farm Road right here, to put you, and this is Union Street, so now you kind of know what we're talking about. The project is replacement of failing drainage on Old Dublin Road, extension of a sidewalk to the condominiums that exist presently, some pedestrian safety enhancements on both of the intersections, grading for drainage improvement, and the replacement of head walls and piping sort of near Robb Farm Road. So I have seen issues since I've worked here with the Public Works Department with this. We've had washouts here and pipes move and problems with road erosion in this spot. I've also heard that since this is the same body of water that there's at times been issues over here, creating some issues on both ends of the property here. So again, this was West Peterborough encouragement for the town to investigate how we can improve this area. This project was put out to bid unsuccessfully, and we're trying now to put a little bit of additional money in the budget so that hopefully if we go back out to bid this year, it will cover the cost to get this done in the next budget year. All right. Any questions on that one? And again, this will go back to the West Peterborough TIF in January. I think it's late January, maybe 2 weeks out at this point. I can't remember the exact date, but we'll be bringing this back up, asking for their approvals, or asking them if they want me to move forward on this project, and the intent would be to go back out to bid this summer when the
I have one question about it. I remember with the whole bid process, I remember it coming in high. But one of the things that goes through my simple mind is that if you offer more money, then they're gonna take the opportunity to take that money, rather than go back out to bid, maybe next summer when a lot of construction projects have probably slowed down. I mean, we don't know the nature of that, right? But it always scares me to say, oh, can you do this for $250? And somebody says no.
Yep.
And you say, can you do it for $350? Then they're probably pretty likely to jump at that chance. So when we're looking at this future over the next couple of months, we might want to consider not just laying on our backs on that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And back to when we were conversing about this project, when we decided to deny it, that was built on that logic. We didn't want to set a precedent that Peterborough will just pay any price to get a project done. I think we've learned a little bit since then, though. And part of that is the cost of labor and goods or materials is way up.
Yeah.
We know it's going to be more expensive than the original $265,000. I absolutely hope we can get this bid under 350 grand. But at least this would give us the flexibility with the offset to say, okay, this is the current state of construction. We shouldn't pay any price. If the prices are justified and we go through the ledger and make sure that they make sense in the present market, we would still have the opportunity to say we either accept or reject the bid from there.
Right.
But it's great critique, and I appreciate it.
And another one of the things that was coming up during those conversations is that construction companies were so booked out with work at that point that they were going to municipalities and saying, I'll just shoot for the moon on this. If we get it, great, we'll figure out how to do it. But if we don't, no harm, no foul, because they already had enough work to begin with. So, just something to think about.
I think Tyler was, yes, sir.
How much is in the West Peterborough TIF? And since we bagged the project, has it gained in how much money has it gained since we backed out of it last time?
I think there's something we can.
Get an exact.
Pretty close to that, right?
2 million.
It was at the
Do you want
time.
an exact?
Do you want exact
I'm
number or
just wondering
ballpark?
if the money we've maybe made over, if we've made some money since the project was put on hold,
Every tax billing absolutely would bring in additional revenues. So,
I gotta remind you that West Peterborough TIF is gonna sunset in, 24, right?
yes, it's coming up. And at that point, if we have monies left over in the TIF fund, we can move those to an expendable trust fund. So we've already talked about what our contingencies there.
So it's not spend it or lose it.
Yeah,
Oh, I knew that part.
yeah. But you said we have about 2 million in
I
that
think so,
fund?
but
Two.
I would be more comfortable if I checked.
I thought it was closer to 1, but I don't.
Why don't I check?
Sufficient funds for this project.
There's plenty of money. There's plenty of money for this budget and, the other things that we've talked about as well as the debt service. So there's really no question. There's plenty of funds in there to do this work.
So I think Lily had suggested she'll get an exact total on that. I don't know if you got that or not. Yes, sir.
Is there any way that this would come under federal infrastructure improvement?
No, this one is more of a discretionary project. There has been no real emergency situations in this spot, so I don't think we would get any federal relief on this project. This one, while would be a smart project to do for the preservation of this area over the next decade plus, hasn't been like other spots in town that maybe have been a little bit more problematic for flooding. So I don't think we would get any grant relief on this. Any other questions on this one?
It's been too cold.
That actually does raise a good point, that with the infrastructure money coming out, there's gonna be a lot of work, a lot of municipal work that's gonna be put out to bid. Which again could run us into that same situation where, contractors could shoot for the moon. So we'll see where we are when the bids come back in.
They also have to be federally approved contractors to get those bids. Not just anybody can get federal money.
It's complicated, but they do have to meet certain benchmarks, that's absolutely true.
But they will subcontract it out to other contract. The question is whether the subs have to be federally approved or just the main contractor. and whether they're allowed to sub it out. And that'll be the little guys that, you might want to have to deal with still. They'll be busy. Or their employees will get siphoned off.
Yeah, I don't know that the big ones, the Beck and Belucci's of the world, are gonna be bidding on a project of this size.
No, not unless we make it into a much bigger project,
Right.
some
It'd have to
way.
be a lot more exciting, for sure, yeah.
I can think of some things.
We can build a bridge out there.
We did.
Build
No, I
a
was gonna
bridge
say, I think we already did that
over the
one.
town.
Yeah, we already did that one.
Sorry.
All right. All right, so South Peterborough engineering for pedestrian improvements. And this is a graphic that our town planner helped me. She put something together so I can help illustrate the concept. Okay, let me step back. The South Peterborough TIF encompasses basically the Rivermead campus and some other areas around. We know there's failing infrastructure in the south of town. Powers Bridge Road has a bridge and a culvert, which are both in terrible disrepair. These are items we've talked about before through capital and other committees. The Morrison Bridge on Grove Street Extension, it's kind of called the Morrison Bridge, is in serious disrepair. The Nunes Falls Bridge, which has been closed for 20 plus years at this point, contains a critical water main and is in serious disrepair. So we know there's known infrastructure in the south of town, and I think that was part of the emphasis on getting a TIF district set up in the southern portion of town so that some savings could start happening to deal with these, what are going to be very expensive capital projects. Now, prior to Rodney's retirement, having gone at least, I don't know, quarterly, now Nicole and I have the fun time of heading down to Rivermead and chatting with folks down there. We had been hearing that they wanted to see us do something with pedestrian improvements in the southern portion of town. The time to do that makes sense when you're going to start planning out all the infrastructure that needs to get repaired. So our town planner and I first went and presented to Rivermead, and we talked to the South Peterborough TIF Advisory Group and started saying, okay, we're going to start thinking through this. We know sort of what our costs are going to be on the known infrastructure, but what we don't know is what the build out looks like from there, and you can avoid a lot of costs by doing it under one contract in the future. So let's start the planning initiative. So from the first meeting that we had, Danica, who's our town planner, Danica Malone, went back and started doing some charrette style stuff with residents in the south portion of town, asking them, okay, what does that look like? What should we be looking at for a build out? And they identified a number of priorities. From there, I took those priorities back. I got in touch with engineers, civil engineers, and said, okay, at this stage in the process, I think it's time to take a really heavy look at how do we actually take these pedestrian improvements and turn them into a meaningful plan before we move towards the full reconstruction of some of these critical pieces of infrastructure. The estimate I got to do that work, although it's a very, very rough estimate at this point, admittedly, is $100,000 to do all that civil work to figure out how this stuff's going to work safely, how it will work within the existing infrastructure, and how we can actually realize some type of vision for the Nunes Falls Bridge. I only gave you the one graphic to keep it sort of quick, but that's essentially what we're asking for here. The residents have said to us we want to do something with pedestrian enhancements. We know there's known infrastructure issues here, and we know there's going to be a cost to bring in the right people to do the traffic studies, to do the civil build out of the more appropriate places where we could put things, to study the feasibility of a pedestrian footbridge, as we've talked about sort of in some informal conversations over near the Morrison Road area. But we're going to need the help to do that. The traffic studies have to be done. These things have to be done in a way that are safe and meaningful, and to do that we need to get the right traffic engineers involved with the project. That would also include things like, what can we do with the Nunes Falls Bridge? Can we turn that, one of the ideas that came from the South Peterborough charrettes was, can we turn the Nunes Falls Bridge into some type of a pocket park? Can you do a park on the end of the bridge? Can you build the existing structure back out in a meaningful way so that people want to use it other than just crossing over the body of water by the Nunes Falls building? So that's essentially what we're saying here. We've got a long ways to go. There's a whole scope that needs to get built out on this, and I do believe that to really, really drive home what we should be doing in here, it's a much larger conversation than just South Peterborough charrettes, but it gets us going on what we know that cost is going to be when we engage with the professionals who do this kind of work. So that's what this is. We've gone, I would say, call it 15 to 20% through the process here, but we sort of know what the cost is, so I wanted to put this in front of you. If we want to do this in a meaningful way, so that we're not just repairing what's there, if we want to look at opportunities for pedestrian enhancements in that portion of town, then now would be the time, or if not this budget, the next budget, but very soon would be the time to start looking at what are our options and how we build that out and incorporate it in with the infrastructure that we're going to repair. Yes, Bill?
Is this, it probably seems like I'm giving you a hard time, and when the South Peterborough TIF people, whose committee I'm on a liaison to, would probably be upset too, but, is this something, this $100,000 just for an engineering study, that doesn't even put down a sidewalk, correct?
Correct.
So, is this engineering study gonna in any way contribute to when that particular bridge right there needs to be replaced, which is not too long from now?
Other than the feasibility of what we would have for options adjacent to that for pedestrian enhancements.
Right, so I mean, my concern is we're spending $100,000 when we're gonna have to spend another engineer bill on that bridge, another engineer bill on the one that carries
All
the water main
infrastructure
at News
combined.
Falls, and then another one on the Powers Bridge side of it.
Which,
So
to be,
my worry is that we're gonna spend $100,000 on pedestrian improvements that doesn't actually work with the next round of engineering. See what I'm saying? Anybody else understand what I'm saying?
well, I think the intent on that last part, Bill, would be to make sure that it is incorporated within the existing infrastructure. And that's why you study it in advance of doing the engineering for, say, the bridge itself. But to your other point, the engineering is going to be significant for the other pieces of infrastructure. We're talking probably 700,000 plus in engineering alone to get us to the point where we can construct. These aren't
Right.
cheap things. They cost a lot of money.
I mean, my thoughts are maybe we could get a little more in-depth and say, well, when we do replace this bridge, we want a sidewalk on the side that's got its own space. Rather than have to pay somebody $100,000 to tell us that that's what we want.
There's also something to be said for doing some of this work in stages. We can show that we're actually getting some of the stuff done. And yes, there's going to be a short segment that may be cut out, when you go to replace that culvert or that bridge.
Yep.
But you've also done the work around it, and you've done it in advance, in stages, piece by piece. Hopefully when it was a little bit cheaper to get it done, rather than a few years down the road when costs have gone up even more.
No, I hear you. And you've heard me say this about 1 billion times over the last however long it is. It's like, seems like we throw an awful lot of money at engineers to tell us what we want to do.
Yeah, but we do it for a really good reason, and
No, I
think-
understand, but if I didn't say it, I wouldn't be being true to me.
So there's more refinement that needs to happen to that number, obviously. That was a conversation with civils that know this type of work specifically, that do understand the scope of the work that's in front of us, but it is back of the napkin. That's where we're at this point. If it's a serious thing that our community is interested in, then I think the next step is to look at it a little bit more in depth and work towards a scope that actually makes sense for our community. But it made sense, given the timing of the infrastructure. We know we've got to do something, that we need to start having this conversation now. We do know the general value of what those services are going to cost. Yes, Tyler. I'm sorry, I think Tyler.
So would the 100K be a complete overall plan for South Peterborough regarding pedestrian improvement?
Yes, 100,000 would be the complete overall plan. That would be the intent.
Everything's integrated. and-
Right. Then the individual components that need to be replaced, since they are bridges and they have spans, are going to be considerably more money than that. But yes, that's a good way of summarizing what I was trying to say, which is that will give you the overarching plan on how we tie this stuff together. So when you go to do your construction, we could realize some savings if this is the route we want to go. If we want to look at a build out for pedestrian improvements, there's going to be a cost associated with hiring the right people to do that work.
Right, and all those elements, the bridges and the roads that do need the repair now, have been there, but pedestrians have never been addressed.
Right.
And we live in a town where people they move here for their pedestrian accessibility. So it's high up on the mark, I think, and that's a part of town that we've been planning for, right?
Yep. I mean, the other option for the community, obviously, is we do nothing with pedestrian. I mean, if we're talking all options, you do nothing, you don't raise this money, you're still going to need to raise engineering money to do the bridges and culverts properly. But this is an opportunity in time to get in front of that and look at, okay, what changes can we make? So go ahead, sir.
Has there been any discussion about the general pattern, traffic pattern, or I don't know what you want to call it, I know it's probably private property, where the Ocean State job lot is. There's now a little highway going through there, which I use a lot to avoid getting onto the bridge. And that may be partly temporary, but that whole area seems like a wasteland that could be better purposed, regardless of whether it's private property or not.
If you're talking about the road that runs in front of Basket Company back to where the car wash
Yes,
is,
that and this little mini highway that goes through the parking lot.
Yeah, that's
We're always
private.
having almost accidents there.
private.
Yeah,
Private,
it's-
that's private roadway. I was surprised to see they actually recently repaired it because it has been private.
Yeah, no, they've done a good job of that. It's just that
Yeah.
it's now a real thoroughfare, and
Right.
if they cut it off, then it's a whole new traffic pattern, possibly.
They didn't mess around with those speed bumps back there, did they?
No, it's still there.
You want to wreck you can wreck your car, you can drive through
Everybody
there.
uses it as a cut through.
Those things are horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is private property. It's not really really appropriate to work around that, but it's a little tight in there too. You know, we don't have a lot of property in that area that I'm aware of. We've got some rail trail property close by and then the road itself. But yeah, it's private.
Right up to that stop sign. And not to belabor the point, but it is TIF district, the money that's raised within the district, it's used for this purpose, and this is the only purpose that money can be put to is things within the district. So I
Yeah.
think that is,
Well, except for bridges and water mains and
it
stuff.
can't, absolutely, and that's, that's a discussion that we are absolutely gonna have, as relates to the infrastructure within that district, but I think that's just a step that we're gonna take a little bit later. And, the TIF district will eventually support the bonds that need to get paid for that work.
I get it. I'm not disagreeing with the fact that this stuff needs to happen. I just think that we throw money at engineers like it's not even real money. A lot. But I know everybody else agrees, even if they're not willing to nod, it's damn.
They're not cheap. I definitely agree with you there. They're absolutely not cheap.
It's difficult.
I mean, and at what point do we just hire an engineer that works for the town? I mean, we could have kept one working for 20 years now. But that's for another conversation.
You could make it an elected position.
Free engineering services? Oh, then on the weekends, they could work out at the swap shop.
Over a long down days.
But to take the suggestion seriously, engineers don't do all engineering jobs. So
No, I know.
One individual can.
It's problematic. In fact, it's one of the reasons communities don't really hire engineers anymore because it's such a specialty field. Even Rodney wasn't actually an engineer, just so you know. He was a manager, never had a PE. Just worked around a lot of engineers throughout his life.
Yeah.
So, and communities, and quite honestly, just to be like totally black and white, nuts and bolts about it, it's a liability question too. You wouldn't do your own engineering in a small community like this because you do need to shift some liabilities when you make big capital investments. If something goes wrong and you didn't go to outside contracted services for that, you have no one but yourself to blame at that point. It's tough, but you're absolutely right. It's incredibly expensive though, and it's problematic. But if you want it done right and done safely, then you do hire qualified engineers.
Right, well, my original point was that I just want to make sure that this works into the next engineer that talks about bridges and water mains, and this isn't just wasted, you know what I mean?
Right. Yes, sir.
So you've covered a lot of ground tonight, Seth, and I wonder if we could sum it all up. Do we have any kind of figure that would enable us to compare the cost or the expenditures of public works that we're proposing for fiscal year 22-23 to last year?
Sure.
Do we have that figure, that statistic available?
I've been trying to do that by division, Ronnie. If you'd like, I think we can easily total something up. Generally funded government, public works, and then enterprise funds. I didn't do it that way for tonight. I've been trying to take you through it division by division and showing you that percentage change year over year. But I don't want to speak for Lily, but I imagine we can come up with something that shows these things. There's an awful lot of offsets and things as you're seeing, so it's a little bit difficult.
Well,
We don't do
he's
the
talking
offsets.
bottom line to bottom line, which is gotta be gotta be able to figure that out.
Yeah, you absolutely can. It's just hard to do it sitting here on the floor.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
No, but that's something I'd be interested in seeing.
If I could find my notebook, I could give you those numbers, but I can't find my notebook.
It is a simple enough thing to do. I think it would be cumbersome to try to do it on the fly right now, but I'd be happy to work with Lily or Lily.
Don't need to see it immediately.
Okay.
And when we say bottom line, we are separating out the portion that's taxes and the portion that's out of TIFs
Right.
and out of enterprise fund.
Yeah, that's part of the thing, is that it's organized a bit differently, so it's a little harder to just, look at it and say, this is that simple. There are a lot of revenue offsets you have to
If
figure
we
out.
get all those on the same page, we can ask ourselves all the questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you just pop back to that last slide for a second? Just to point out, that's a Porsche in the picture.
I was gonna say that. Is that a Porsche? Of course it is.
It might be a Porsche with European plates on it.
Yeah, it is Rivergate.
That looks expensive.
They came a long way.
It is really,
All right, I skipped over the big nut in the highway budget, which was the $450,000 preventative maintenance line, which is our paving, and didn't talk about the $400,000 continuation of our road program, because I've traditionally over the last few years coupled these together so that we can help you differentiate the differences between those two piles of money. It's worth noting, this program goes back a few years now, and I know I've talked a lot to Bill Kennedy about this because he lives on one of these roads that we are still needing to get to. And as I've reminded Bill and others in the downtown, they're saying, hey, it's time for us to do some downtown work. We're prepping for it because we know it's going to be incredibly expensive. So one of the things we've been doing over the last couple of years is not expending the full amount but leaving it in the trust fund. It's probably a little higher than this now because I had this figure a month ago or a little bit more than a month ago for CIP. But we have saved $260,000. So when I show you the work we've done over the last few years, also keep in mind we are saving towards pretty heavy, expensive downtown work, because it's not like it is in our rural roads where we just grind up roads and pave them back. Well, on a road like Pine Street, it's curbing, drainage, water services, sewer manhole covers. I mean, there's a lot of ancillary costs involved with that. So we're prepping for that. And I just wanted to point that out, that everything we raise, we don't just necessarily spend. We're spending a percentage of it and leaving money in the bank to help us with the more expensive work downtown. So we started a pavement management program, and I'll try to go really quick because I know we're running long here. A few years ago, I think we're entering now our 5th year of that program. And what the intent of that program is, and this graph, this thing always sums it up pretty well, in my opinion, is we've got two piles of money, $450,000 in our operating budget, and that's basically from here over. And what that money does is helps us to keep resetting the useful life of that road for a cheaper dollar figure. The money that goes through the warrant process in town meeting is actually to deal with the roads that are over here, which there is no return on investment for rehabbing these roads. You can't just simply spend some crack seal money and somehow bring the condition up to excellent. You can't do it. But we can keep our excellent roads good. But we have a certain number of roads that were allowed to fall into disrepair over the last 2 decades that we just can't. There's nothing we can do other than repave them, and that costs an awful lot of money. The difference goes from the crack sealing that we had done. We've had a little trouble with contractors on that, but the last time we did it, call it $1 a foot or so, versus when you dig up a roadway and you repave it, $50 a square foot. So it's an incredible swing in price. And that's essentially what the program's aimed at doing. We determined through our operating budget that the $450,000 that we've raised and appropriated probably for 15 years now is adequate for us to keep our good roads in good shape, but inadequate for us to deal with the roads that have already fallen into disrepair. And that's what the capital money is. It's the money that we need to rehab roads such as Pine Street, such as any number of the roads I'll show you on the list in a moment, that we just can't. We can't throw a couple bucks at it and hope it'll be good. We really just need to have a contractor in and rip it up. So when we started the program, we took a baseline. We worked with your favorite engineers. They taught us how to do this work. We trained with them. I can tell you it wasn't a $100,000 project though. It was short money, and what we did was we bought a system off them. We bought a software system off them, and we bought training off them. And we trained myself, a couple interns at the time, to learn how to properly inspect our roadways so that we could actually develop a detailed budgetary forecast. When we finished that work, all the way back in 2017, we found out that our roadway network rating was a 70.45. So when you looked at all roads around town, 0 being the worst, 100 being perfect, brand new paved road, our network was rated at a 70. Since we started the program and we've done a tremendous amount of work, we've been able to raise the overall road network rating up to a 77. And that's through the work that you see listed on the board here, back in 2018. This is the work that was funded through the expendable trust that'll go through town meeting again this year. This is the work that was funded through the operating budget to keep the healthy roads in good shape. Same here, this is what we funded through the expendable trust, because these were beyond repair and needed significant investment. This is the work that we did through our operating budget. Again, 2021 season, more paving getting done, more roads getting chip sealed, crack sealed, or rehabbed for a much shorter dollars. And then this last year, we did the Pine Ridge neighborhood. It was a tremendous effort by our highway crew, by the way. They deserve a lot of credit for that project because it's compact within a residential neighborhood. A lot of drainage considerations in there, a tremendous amount of prep work. So not only do we hire out a lot of this work, they deserve a lot of credit for how much prep work they do to get ready for contractors to come in and do the paving. This was the last year, and as we've said over and over again tonight, COVID has been a problem for contractors, scheduling, prices, all of it. We haven't been able to get crack seal done, but we're going to try again this spring and see if we can get someone in. Any questions on the road program? We are, like I said, halfway through. We're saving for the downtown. The intent's to put it back on the warrant again this year and keep getting the crummy roads rehabbed and taking care of the good ones. Keep saving some money and get ready for downtown paving because it's going to be expensive, yes, sir.
So when does Pine Street get done?
I thought Bill was going to ask it. This winter, we're looking at legitimate cost estimates for trying to do that this coming year. We have two really high priority roads that I think we're due for. One of them, and I'm not going to fully commit at this point because, as I tell people every single year, obviously the cost to do downtown work is quite expensive. But we always wait until the spring, the freeze thaws happen to look at the roads and make sure we didn't bite off a contract before we've looked at the network again in case there's a more pressing need.
So is Pine Street behind, I mean, is that more than paving, reclaim, and rehabilitation? Pine Street is a total? Yeah, it is. Anywhere we've got sidewalks, curbing, public, and other public utilities, the cost is considerably more. We did some back of the napkin at this point, and estimates are Pine Street's in excess of $200,000 if we have that, probably north of that at this point, as opposed to a road that we can just go through and hire a paver to do of a similar length, which might cost us $50,000. So yeah, it's considerable because you wouldn't just go in and pave over it and leave dilapidated drainage pipes or curbs that need to be reset or sidewalks and all those other pieces of infrastructure that also need some attention. But to your question, we're going to take a hard look at getting Pine Street done this coming year. So would you also be ripping up water mains? Because I think another one just got repaired there.
We know that the water main on the sort of 101 side is in need of replacement. We'll be looking at that cost as well. Yes, sir.
Along those same lines, will 101 be repaved or resurfaced in that area where it meets Pine Street? Because you're going to dovetail with that somehow.
I'd have to look at the bounds of the project for the 101 bridge project, but I know there's a section that comes up from the bridge that's included in the final punch list for the 101 bridge project.
And there's already a joint there because the state DOT guy was talking about the joint where they stopped the paving last summer, and they're going to meet up with that for the bridge. I just don't know if it was, which side of Pine Street it was on.
Right.
It's right in there somewhere.
Could you just remind us what chip seal means?
Sure. Chip seal is like if you've been on Old Street Road. Old Street Road, we were able to rehab that. Actually, maybe Old Street Road's not the best example.
Old Jaffrey Road.
Old Jaffrey Road. What's Carly Road? Basically, what it is it's we've been using a rubberized product. So you've got your conventional asphalt road, and you can sort of scuff that up. And then there's a sealant that you can put over. What's about the depth on the sealant, Tim?
Well, what they take our normal roadway and then they go over it and they throw asphalt down. And that asphalt binds your stone, your chip seal, which is a 3/8 stone, to your original road. And that gives it a prolonged life of 5 to 8 years. So it reseals your road, keeps it from drying out, cracking, keeps us from crack sealing, and then adds that extra 5 to 8 years on top of your already repaved road.
Right. So
you're essentially keeping, like Seth says, your good road's good.
Right. So for instance, Old Street Road, we rehabbed the road and then we then we rubberized, chip sealed it a few years ago, probably 5 years ago or something. As opposed to just over 20 years, sort of letting it fall into disrepair again. A few more years down the road, we can come back at a much lower cost, grind that top layer of chips off, and then reapply them again without the base. The theory being that the base of the road stays intact. So you've just resealed the road. You put down a protective layer on top of it, thereby reducing your cost tremendously. But it does, in many cases, require heavier construction to rehab the road before you could chip seal it. The town started converting many roads to chip seal type, at least 12, 15 years ago, and we've continued the program on.
Right longer.
Is that an answer?
Old Street Road is actually a really good example of it. Maybe not this time of year, but if you look at Old Street Road, or any part of it, at least up to the intersection with Sand Hill, it's really obvious that it has been chip sealed. You can see, like, it almost looks like you took a layer of rubber and then laid little stone chips down on it. It's pretty interesting if you look at it close. It's not just regular pavement.
What it is, and then Old Street Road, I think, is now 5 years out, and has held up really good. And the ride has, the first year the ride kind of sucks. You get that crummy stone and it's flying up every year, but after that it starts to smooth out and it becomes an excellent sealant for keeping your road drivable.
It's also a little louder, so it has a tendency to slow people down even just a little bit because you actually hear your tires better. I know people on Old Street Road and other areas would probably disagree with me on that, but the science is actually out there. It's louder and it actually causes people to go a little bit slower than they would on a conventionally paved road. And it's a heck of a lot cheaper. I'm good to move on from this unless there's any more questions.
Just right after people get their roads repaved, built and all rebuilt, and you can't complain about speeders right after that. It's either bumpy roads or people driving fast. There's no middle ground there. Just as the people on Old Street Road.
They drive fast on Hunt Road, no matter what it's like.
Yeah.
In response to Ron's request for the increases for all the public works divisions that do not include the enterprise funds, it's a total of, if you don't include the TIF, $450,000, which is a complete offset with the TIF revenues, it's a $19,653 increase on a $2,428,000 total.
And that includes all the 30% fuel increase, which is what?
Yep.
400, 500,000 of that?
So
They drop.
and then the comparison with the water sewer, you're looking at a $500,000 decrease between the two.
Thank you.
The Highway Vehicle Capital Reserve, last year, we requested and were approved $80,000 to put into the Vehicle Capital Reserve for the town. We are asking to do it again. We don't know what the cost of the replacement six-wheeler, it's actually a 10-wheeler, but we're gonna downsize that truck to a six-wheeler. We don't know what the cost is gonna be, but we are asking at this point, the same conversation we've been having all night. The volatility of these markets is very difficult to predict going into next year. So our intent is to ask for the additional $80,000 for the replacement of that truck. Hope we have enough money, and if we don't have enough money, we'll be asking for the remainder the following year or by some other mechanism. We already, like I said, have $80,000 in the capital reserve, and that's the beautiful blue truck that we're looking to turn into a semi-retired truck. It's got some miles and some engine hours on it, and it's served the town beautifully, but we do have to swap these out every few years. We normally, in prior years, we would ask for the full $160,000, but this was a downshift last year, given our the request to be as responsible as possible with the budget, with the unknowns of the pandemic. So this would give us the remainder of those funds that we started raising last year. Is that the only blue one left?
There's two.
Yeah. That's that.
Both the international.
We got two blue ones still. And this is that glass pressure bucket I said I would get back to.
Bez used to be. He runs the six-wheeler, the blue six-wheeler.
So there's a glass crusher bucket, that's essentially what it does. It's a front-end loaded mechanism that allows us to process the glass. There's our incredible glass pile, which you gotta see it out back to really believe how much we've got back there, but it's an accumulation of at least 10 years worth of glass at this point. We'd like to consolidate that pile down, and we'd like to create a usable product, and that's the idea behind this purchase. And again, this is completely offset, at least that's our intent, by the Reclamation Trust Fund, so no.
Where will the new material be stored?
I mean, I guess you could answer that, Dave, but just pushing it back farther.
It'd be stored on site. There is a pile of spoils from either highway ditching or water main breaks at the wastewater plant. It could be stored there too.
Now, is this bucket, would that also be able to be used for asphalt as well?
It won't do that now.
It's glass only?
Yeah.
Any other questions on?
Seth, not to sound crazy,
Yeah.
but that shouldn't be in the budget if you're using reclamation fund.
Okay.
Because you've got is that what you're using?
That was the intent, I believe.
Then you just saved $28,000?
I showed it in the earlier slide as being offset, so I adjusted, but Lily's saying that given that it has a full offset from the Reclamation Trust, it shouldn't actually be loaded into the operating budget, so.
That makes this asphalt.
I think we'll-
The money's already there in that
The money's
capital
there.
reserve fund.
Okay.
So yeah, because that pile.
28.
It won't do that. 'cause
Another
there's
28?
concrete mix
Yep,
in
so
it.
now you're down.
That's what I
Nine.
was saying.
What would you say the value of all that glass material is?
Presently, lagoon fill.
0.
Yeah, and not much. Well, I've actually inquired with contractors that I talk to all the time on whether there was any value in it to them, and they said, no, not as it is now, but if it was turned into a crushed aggregate, we could use it for road base
What would that say?
material fill. I honestly don't know what we'd assign for a value on that. We called around, I don't know of any other centers that are doing this, it's a bit new. We have a use for a lot of it ourselves, so there's value to it, to us. I mean, one project that we're at least planning to do as time allows is to create a better access road for our forced sewer main, which runs to the sewer plant sort of in that general area, and we would use a lot of that for base for that particular roadway.
And the roads around the landfill for access for the water testing, the groundwater testing.
And about how small does it pulverize the glass to, not sand size, right?
3/4 minus.
3/4.
You can still cut the dickens out of your feet on it.
No. So not becoming a palm.
Half wasted on the.
Yeah.
Any other questions on the glass processing bucket? I mentioned the Winter Ops Expendable Trust earlier in the evening. We have $53,890, probably plus a little bit at this point, because that might be a little bit older number and it might have incurred some interest. We're asking to put another $5,000 into that this year. That is the money that was set aside years ago, as I mentioned, a cushion in the event that we have a 30% increase on salt. We would come to the select board, who are agents to expend, and say, we have a problem, we have this money, can we use it for this purpose? I think this might be last but not least, vehicle capital reserve. We put $75,000 into a capital reserve for the replacement of that truck, which is our Vector truck, in the present budget, and we're asking to put another $75,000 in it. We're not even certain if that's gonna get us there, because we work within a used market for these trucks. We're hoping there's one available to us. There's also some money available in another sewer, forgot the name of the title of the account.
Sewer department.
Yeah, just
No, there's a
sewer
capital.
Sewer department.
That's what it's
capital
called.
reserve fund.
Yeah.
There you go. I think when things are simple. So there's some additional money in there, and the intent would be to raise the additional 75, takes us to 150, see if we can be competitive on the market through the sale of that truck and the money we've got, and then ask for the authorization to upgrade the truck. If we can't do that, if it doesn't make sense financially because the market won't, we'll be back in another year asking for additional monies to get us up to where we need to be. But new trucks, yes ma'am. Thank you. Any questions on this truck? Now we're getting really long here at this point, so seeing none. Cheney Ave lift station, there's two more sewer items here. Lift station pump and motor. The board may remember a couple years back, we had looked into engineering, Bill's favorite subject, for the replacement of the Cheney Ave lift station, and we received estimates of $1 million. recognizing that the Cheney Ave lift station, which is located right about here, this is Old Street Road, here's Cheney and our station's there, only services a very small portion of our sewer system. We didn't think that that number was palpable at this point, so we asked engineers again to check out the structural integrity of the can, which is this, all this stuff is down below the ground. They told us that the structure is actually in pretty good shape and that it might be worthwhile for us to then explore replacement pumps at that point. So we're recommending, instead of the $1 million we were anticipating, there's another $900 and whatever $1,000 savings for you right there on top of the 28. $65,000 to replace these pumps, and we're asking to get that this year so we can get that thing back in good working order. I guess I would ask for more comments if you have any questions on that.
That's user fees, correct?
Yeah, this is through the enterprise fund.
I have one question on that.
Yep.
Back to the engineering part. A couple, 3 years ago now, there was $80,000 put into the budget for engineering to figure that lift station out, right?
I don't remember the exact total, but I believe you're right.
I think it was $80,000. For some reason, it's sticking in my head, but.
I don't believe we actually spent all that.
What's that?
I don't believe we
did spend
actually.
Yeah, well, that was my next question.
We did engineer that. We have engineered plans for that lift station. We have 2 options. We have a gravity system or a complete replacement of the pump system now. But given the cost to do this project for the small amount of houses it serves, it made sense to take a step back from that and look at it from another angle.
Right.
And we did.
So I was just thinking about if there's anything left of that $80,000 that was supposed to go to that lift station.
I believe that came out of the sewer simple fund.
Right. Also, and Tyler, to answer your question from 2 slides ago, or 10, right by that yellow block
Yeah.
where the lift station
That's
is,
exactly where the water main is.
that red spot is definitely a water main break.
But at the
Right next to
time-
that is the new one.
Right.
So, but at the time, it was possibly developing the Stone Burn property, and weren't they gonna extend the sewer out there? But that didn't happen.
There was talks of that, yeah, there was talks of that project having their own lift stations that would get up to our station.
Right.
Which at that point would have probably made a little bit more sense to try and work a partnership with some type of development to rehab that lift station, but that doesn't, as far as I know right now, look like a possibility. Yet, our problems still remain in this station. I'm not standing here promising that replacing these pumps is gonna extend the life of that station for 30 years, but it's certainly gonna put us back in good working shape for now.
Right.
And lastly is the utilities waste grinder. That is hooked up to our sewer system, and we'll leave it to your imagination as to what that handles. Terrible things that get into pipes that should never be in pipes, and that thing helps to take care of that so that our guys aren't putting their hands down in pipes and pulling things out. All right, it's $15,000. It's called a muffin monster, and because why wouldn't it be? I don't know.
I'm glad you thought it was as funny as that.
We need to replace that every 5 years because there's a lot of stone and debris that wear out the cutters on that.
That's it. That's the last slide.
You're really gonna leave it at that?
Nice work.
All right, seeing no more questions, let me thank you for being sensitive to our request to be very succinct. I mean that very seriously. I think that you were very focused on the questions relevant to the budget analysis, so thank you for that. Although the time may be long, I think the job was a good job. I think you did a good job of justifying a number of things, such as the way you calculated the energy costs and how it will be estimated for budget purposes. And we all have a list of follow-up responses we're hoping for. I hope many of those make it in the minutes, but in any event, when we see the minutes, we'll check our own list against it.
Just one quick thing before you go, Bill, they handed me the cash balances for the TIP accounts. In total, there's about $2.5 million. The West Peterborough TIP has a balance of about $1.13 million.
Great job, Seth. Thank you. Thank you, Nate. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks to Nate, Tim, really as well. Staff didn't be here tonight, but they put a lot of work into this budget as well. They do a lot of the work out in the field that influences this
Thank you and your
budget.
team. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.